The Corporate Council on Africa has organized the virtual Corporate Council on Africa Leaders Forum with the theme Resilient U.S. Africa Business Engagement to Drive Post-COVID-19 Recovery. This virtual forum will take place this week, starting tomorrow through Friday the 26th. And to shed more light on this, I'm being joined by the President and CEO, Corporate Council on Africa, Florizelle Liser. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program. Well, let's begin this conversation with you telling us why this forum on U.S. Africa has become imperative at this time.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak. We know that COVID-19 has been rapidly spreading across Africa. We realize, though, that to fight COVID-19 and also to prepare for post-COVID-19 economic recovery in Africa, which is so critical, that we couldn't just wait. We needed to bring together U.S. and African leaders, both from government and from private sector. And so our Leaders Forum is something that we're pulling together so that we can shine a light on Africa, on the opportunities in Africa, some of which will be new because of COVID. Last year, we had our U.S. Africa Business Summit in Maputo, Mozambique. And this year, in fact, about 2 weeks ago, we would have held our annual U.S. Africa Business Summit in Marrakesh, Morocco. But because we could not do that, we thought we still must convene all of the leaders that we can. And so we're very pleased that as a part of our Leaders Forum this coming week, as you said, Tuesday through Friday, we'll be shining a light on different aspects of resiliency in the U.S.-Africa business relationship. We'll be looking at the financial ways to address economic recovery in Africa. We'll be looking at health issues. We'll be looking at trade as drivers of economic growth on the continent. And we're so pleased that we have 4 African heads of state that have already confirmed their participation. So over the next 4 days, we'll be welcoming President Kagame of Rwanda, President Nyusi of Mozambique, President Kenyatta of Kenya, and President Akufo-Addo of Ghana. In addition, we'll have a number of CEOs from both U.S. and African companies that will be joining us, and high-level officials from the U.S. government as well.
Would Nigeria be in any way represented?
Well, we have invited them. We are still crossing our fingers and hoping that His Excellency, the Vice President Osinbajo of Nigeria, will join us. I've had the pleasure of meeting with him before. He knows Corporate Council on Africa and has participated in previous events that we have done. And so cross our fingers, and maybe you can put in a good word for us, or maybe if he sees this today, Vice President, we would love to have you join us. So yes, we are definitely hoping that Nigeria will be at the table for this important conversation.
We'll see how that goes. The Trump administration seems to be more focused on bilateral relation as opposed to multilateral relation. In terms of investment now, where does America want to position itself as long as Africa is concerned?
Well, you know, this is a perfect time for the U.S. to be focused on how we can advance our economic relationship with Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Area that has been launched will create the largest free trade market in the world. And in Africa, there'll be a growth of about 70% annually of consumer spending over the next 10 years. It'll amount to over $6.7 trillion. And we also know that the youth population of Africa is so large and is also playing a critical role in terms of entrepreneurship in some sectors that are growing there faster than any others in terms of internet, the digital economy. And so this is a perfect time for U.S. companies. We're there. There are a lot of U.S. companies that are there. Many of CCA's members, like GE and Procter & Gamble and Caterpillar, have been there for many years. And then there are new companies that people don't hear about, like Acro Bridge, that's building infrastructure across the continent, and has some new things that they'll be doing in Mozambique and other countries as well. So this is a perfect time for U.S. companies to look at Africa and to see what are the growing opportunities, the new opportunities for engagement there.
Now, talking about U.S.-Africa trade relations now, they've been governed for the past 20 years by the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. But would you say that AGOA has really worked for African countries?
Well, the answer to that is yes, but has it done all that it could, all that we would like it to? No. So there are approximately 5 years left to AGOA. I think it's really important that the Africans are continuing to try to take advantage of AGOA's market access to the U.S. We're a huge market. The majority of their products can come in duty-free. And a number of countries, we hear about the countries that are shipping oil, for example, like Nigeria, but Nigeria is shipping other products as well to the U.S., value-added products, agricultural products, shea butter products, etc. So we don't hear about that as much. We don't hear about Kenya that's now shipping $500 million worth of apparel to the U.S. every year, as well as footwear coming from Ethiopia. Many of the stores you're going into in the United States are selling products that are made and produced in Africa and benefiting from AGOA. But because AGOA will likely be phasing out at the end of this 5 years coming up in 2025, this is also a good time to look at new opportunities and new ways for Africa to engage with the U.S. in terms of its trade relationship. And we're really pleased at Corporate Council on Africa that we're looking at things like a free trade agreement, which will be a model. This is one with Kenya. This can be a model for what is happening in East African regional integration, as well as supporting the African Continental Free Trade Area in terms of how the Africans can better integrate themselves into global value chains. And U.S. companies trading with Africa and developing new platforms for engagement, such as trade arrangements, bilateral investment treaties, et cetera. These are ways that Africa can take its current trade relationship with the United States to another level. Let me just also mention that there are several U.S. government programs that are relatively new. Prosper Africa, which is a whole of government approach where 17 different U.S. government agencies are all working together now to try to support U.S. companies who are doing business in Africa and want to do business in Africa. And so Prosper Africa is a new initiative. And then we are also really excited about the fact that the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, it used to be called OPIC, has now become the Development Finance Corporation. And DFC has doubled the amount of resources that will be available to companies doing business in the continent. U.S. and African companies partnering together in joint ventures. They'll have about $60 billion. And they'll also be able to do equity loans, which they were not able to do previously. So again, even though it may seem like the U.S., both the government and the private sector are not there on the continent, that's really not true. They really are. And there are new opportunities to do even more.
And speaking of opportunities to do even more now, what would you say is the way forward as long as U.S.-Africa business relation is concerned?
So I think the way forward is to look at some key sectors. I think that in the African Continental Free Trade Area, they're opening up now as much as 90% of trade in goods. They also are looking at liberalization of the market in services trade, which is really important in Africa. The services sectors, telecom services, banking and financial services, distribution services. These are really key on the continent, and they are also key for U.S. companies who want to do business there and need to have the infrastructure, the kind of connectivity, access to the latest and best financial platforms, which Africa is really providing more than other places. I first came across mobile banking on trips to Africa before it was even available here in the United States. So there's some sectors like that, which we believe are really going to create opportunities for economic recovery from COVID and set some new platforms for how companies can engage.
What would you say are the potential impacts of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement on U.S. Africa trade agreements?
Well, as I said earlier, the African Continental Free Trade Area, from our perspective, is a game changer. I think many of you know that Africa is composed of 54 countries. There are many markets that are small and landlocked. And so creating this new free trade area, as I said, the largest one in the world, where goods can move freely, goods and people and services can move freely across borders in Africa, but also make it possible for Africa to trade and engage with the global economy more effectively. And so we see the AFCFTA as really critical. We have lots of companies that are asking questions about, like, how can we be a part of this? How should we position ourselves, CCA, so that we can take advantage of this new market? And we believe that that will be an opening for companies who weren't sure, do I go to this small economy here or this small economy here, or even the larger economies like Nigeria? Will it give us access to all of the ECOWAS countries in West Africa? Now, with the AFCFTA, companies know that they can come, they can invest in one place, and they will be able to basically engage with, trade with the rest of the continent. And this is really critical. And again, we see this as a game changer.
How can African governments engage in a coordinated response to meet the needs from COVID-19 in Africa?
A new response to what?
To COVID-19 in Africa.
I'm sure I'm not hearing the creative word.
Well, I was asking that how can African governments actually engage in a coordinated response to meet the needs from COVID-19 here on the African continent?
Oh, yes. So I think that African governments are really in need of collaborating and working together closely. No one country by itself is going to be able to overcome COVID. This is something that doesn't respect borders, obviously. And it's going to be critical that there be engagement amongst themselves, coordination, collaboration. And there are efforts that are being put in place by the African Union so that Africans can indeed work together effectively amongst themselves, but also with the global community. So there have been efforts, I know some that are being led by the African CDC, others by UNECA and so forth. And that ability to come together and also to approach the Western world and their partners from all over the world, frankly, in terms of what it is that Africa needs, what the governments need in terms of support, what the private sector needs in terms of support, so that Africa's economic recovery can move forward smoothly and effectively.
All right, at the end of this forum now, how do you hope to ensure the implementation of some of the outcome of this forum?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I was asking that at the end of the forum now, how would you be able to track the implementation of some of the recommendations that would be made at the end of the forum?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I think that one of the things that CCA has been well known for in our 27 years, I didn't say before, but we are a nonprofit business association with both U.S. and African members. And companies that are multinationals as well as SMEs. And by providing the access, connections, and insights that businesses need to be successful when they are doing business on the continent, we've been able to enhance business relationships between the United States and our partners on the continent. And at the end of our Leaders Forum, we will be taking the information that has been shared. We have some really high-level panels with some top people, CEOs of different companies, heads of organizations, like UNECA. We have one of the AU envoys that has been appointed by President Ramaphosa. And what we will be doing is gathering up all of the information that comes from the 4 panels, high-level panels that we have on the 4 topics we'll be discussing. We will be sending out information about some of those things that come out in those sessions. And then it's our plan that as we move towards September, we're all looking to see whether or not the UN General Assembly will happen as it always does. But whether it happens in person in New York or it happens virtually, Corporate Council on Africa plans to use UNGA as an opportunity to follow up on some of the things that we know will be heard this coming week during our Leaders Forum.
We would like to thank you, President and CEO, Corporate Council on Africa, Florizelle Liser, for taking time to speak with us on Business Morning.
Thank you so much to Channels TV for having me.